Today we're continuing the NativeScript chat series where I get to chat with community members that are involved with NativeScript, and you get to put a name to a face, or a face to a name, whichever way you want to think about that. Today I've got a special guest, Jamie Birch. He comes from Bristol, England. Jamie is the creator of React NativeScript. He builds smart TV applications by day, and he dabbles in React Native, and he wanted to bring that React Native feel to NativeScript because NativeScript has some advantages that React Native doesn't, and he'll talk about that right now. And this is actually the second interview I'm doing with him because the first one, he was visiting DC, and I recorded it, but the sound was terrible. We were outside and it was cold and the wind was blowing on the microphone. That didn't come out very well. So I'm not gonna post that here, but here's a clip.
He flew all the way from Birch, England, Bristol.
Luckily, Jamie agreed to do this again. I appreciate that. Here's Jamie. Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Alex. Today I have a special guest. His name is Jamie Birch, and he comes all the way from Bristol, England. He's actually doing a remote chat with me right now, unlike that one time when he visited DC, but unfortunately I screwed up that whole recording where we had a nice little interview, a nice little dinner in DC by the river. So that recording didn't happen, but we're doing this again. Now, Jamie, he is well known for making waves in the cross-platform mobile app world by integrating React with NativeScript and creating something that's known as React NativeScript. So welcome to the show, Jamie. Thanks for joining me. And if there's anything I missed, feel free to fill in those gaps.
No, that's all really good. Thanks for having me along. Great to be talking. And it's a pity our first chat in DC was interrupted by wind, ultimately, but it was great fun.
Yeah, it was a windy day and it was cold. Now we're a little bit more comfortable, hopefully. So I just wanted to ask you a few questions here that I have listed out. We'll start off with, what is your development background in? What are you known for in the world before NativeScript?
So I guess I didn't really have much presence before I started getting involved in NativeScript. I'm a relatively recent dev, so my actual, I think we've recently reached a threshold at which I have more of a dev background than my background before it, which was sort of genetics. So I did a 1-year conversion course into computer science, and then from then on, I've been making web apps for smart TVs. So I'm in sort of the world of broadcasting and apps all around the topic of like getting things onto your TV.
TV apps. So I'm guessing things like Samsung and smart TVs and things like that.
Absolutely. So there's a whole kind of variety of apps that are becoming possible on smart TVs nowadays, which are web-based apps. Anything you could view in a desktop web browser, if you resize it for a TV and make it accept remote control button presses, it could be a viable smart TV app. There's more to it than that, but there's a lot of overlap with web development is the key takeaway.
So what brought you to the world of NativeScript initially?
I had this hobby project, which I'm still working on ultimately. First, I tried making a native app using just pure iOS, and it was a Swift-based app. And it was going to be an app to help people learn languages, whichever language they speak, they can learn whichever language they want to try and learn. And it's an augmented web browser. So it does a lot of things that require native code access. Obviously, a website's not going to do it because I need to pull natural language tokenizers, all sorts of things. So heavily native stuff. And bit by bit, I started thinking, well, it'd be really nice to have this app on other platforms. And so I started turning my attention to things like React Native. I had to play with that. And it sped me up in some ways. I really liked being able to think in a web developer's mindset with things like Flexbox and CSS. And I love the hot reloading. But it was really tricky to navigate your way through all the native access because it's asynchronous. You lose all that joy of the hot reloading because you have to set up your native modules. Anytime you make a change to those, you've got to recompile your whole app. Like, what's the point? So at some random point, I really don't know how I came across it, I found out about NativeScript. I just heard the idea that you could access native code from JavaScript inline, synchronous, and you have full TypeScript type things. And I thought, what? That's just magical. So one day I gave it a go, and it was just entrancing. How you could get all the benefits of native code, but use a TypeScript compiler. And at that time, the Swift compiler was just so slow within my copy of Xcode on my old laptop, and I was actually writing native code faster through JavaScript than I'd ever written in Xcode, which is ridiculous to think about. So I wanted that experience, but NativeScript is hard. To actually make UIs in NativeScript is really, really hard. It's especially if you don't have this idea of how to separate like model, view model, and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
That's just wasn't an architecture I was used to.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it would be really nice to have the best of React Native and the best of NativeScript together, which leads naturally into an introduction of, so I made React NativeScript.
So you made React NativeScript. You make it sound so simple. Hey, I made React NativeScript. I just went up and wrote this framework in a day, right?
Oh, geez. So there was a fair bit of, there was a lot to it, to be fair.
How long did it take you?
Depends where you start calling it finished. I'd say 3 to 6 months is the bulk of it. A few months after that, I was occupied with making a sample app and making the docs. But, the vast majority of it was done in 3 to 6 months, because the main things involved in bringing React to NativeScript are figuring out what do DOM actions such as append child and, setting properties. Things you would do in a web DOM, how can you get how can you describe that to React if your host is NativeScript? It took a while to figure out, well, what happens if you want to append an action bar into a frame? How should we handle that? And I had to just try and find things that wouldn't make it crash, and eventually tame all the bits. Most of my time was just fighting with TypeScript typings. If this was done in JavaScript, this could have been done in a month or something.
Now, at one point, the React team came out with hooks, and you rewrote the entire package using, instead of class components, using functional, or can you elaborate on that?
So I gave that a go on the flight to DC, actually. There's actually a branch on the React NativeScript repo that is available for viewing right now, which is, I think, it's just called hooks, and you can see the whole code base has been rewritten. It was a lot of retyping, and I say type, I mean just keyboard work. Ultimately, I got a bit stuck because list view, I just couldn't turn that into a hook-based component. If you're going to rewrite it, it's all or nothing. You can't have one component that can't inherit like all the rest of them. So I kind of ground to a halt there and said, you know what, I'll live without it for the moment, and maybe I'll come back and revisit this later.
But people can check out that code. It's under your React NativeScript repo under the hooks branch. And if anybody wants to contribute, feel free to do that. I'm sure Jamie would appreciate any kind of pull requests. Besides React NativeScript being the obvious answer, how did you start learning NativeScript? Was it core, or is it Angular, or is it Vue?
I learned it core. My first NativeScript core app was something called NSIDE, which is shortened to NSIDE. It's something that lets you just type in some NativeScript code onto your iPhone and run it and see what it evaluates to. So it's a REPL. It was really hard to pull together because Flexbox isn't quite the same as the web implementation. Things like 100% width have a different meaning. I'd have to dig up an example to show you what I mean by that. But yeah, I just couldn't get the interface looks terrible because I just couldn't find a way to get things behaving right.
I remember you talking about that REPL on Twitter, and it blew my mind because that's something I really wanted since the beginning when I started working with NativeScript, because other frameworks have something similar like that, right? And is the code for that available? Is that tool available for people to use also?
Yeah, so it's totally open source, and I also released it on pre-built on the App Store, which costs like less than $1 for the convenience. But yeah, the code's all out there.
Nice. So people can check that out. I'll link to it down below. Speaking of NativeScript, do you have a favorite tool that you use or a favorite plugin that you use?
I don't think I use anything really. I use Visual Studio Code, no extensions, no plugins, standard syntax highlighting. I brought a few things for React NativeScript development. I figured out, I set up hot reloading, which is just a question of plugging something into Webpack. And you can set up React dev tools as well, which I've got some links about how to do it on the documentation.
That's pretty purist. I like that too. That's how I like to roll. As little plugins as possible. I mean, plugins allow you to do lots of really cool things, but at the same time, I want to try to accomplish things without using plugins and see how far I can get. It's just it makes me feel cleaner some way and not dependent on other things.
When you say plugins, we were talking about IDE plugins, or?
No, I was talking about NativeScript plugins. So do you have any of those that you want to share?
Okay. I made a plugin for syntax highlighting. In that app, we were talking about the REPL app. It takes the text that you type in and it interprets it as JavaScript, and it syntax highlights that live as you type along.
Whoa, that's pretty cool. I'm gonna have to play around with that. That sounds really awesome. So that's your favorite plugin, is your own.
Well, I didn't know we were talking about favorites, but it does have a special place in my heart as the first one I made. And actually, the first piece of NativeScript work that I've ever had a contribution to. So Osei Fortune came out of nowhere, and he cleaned up the way that I just kind of jumbled together the iOS stuff. He made it all more kind of how it's professionally done, and he contributed an Android version of it. And I was like, wow, I was really blown away. That's
convenient.
Whoops in and makes it 10 times.
Nice. Yeah, Osei is a great guy. He is really knowledgeable in iOS and Android, and it's very few and far between, or far and few between. I don't know what the phrase is. Not too many people. What's the phrase?
Few and far between.
Few and far between. Thank you. English is not my native language, so I'm still learning all the different phrases. But yeah, Osei is pretty cool. I hope to have him on the show here as well. So what kind of hardware do you like to develop on? Do you use a Mac or do you use Windows?
Definitely a Mac. Yes, 100% Mac. I grew up with Macs for a start. My dad was into Macs kind of while they were still beige. And that's been, I've been through platinum sounds where you double click on the windows and it goes all the beautiful classic Mac stuff.
That says it all.
So it's got a special place in my heart, and I just love the look of it. Absolutely, macOS it's got some things that could be better. Like I'd really like to be able to drag windows, like with Windows, how it can actually organize your windows into, you know what I mean?
I know, yeah, snapping. Yeah, why? It shouldn't be that hard. They can build that in, right?
There might be a patent involved. I don't know.
I think there's actually some apps that you can download that allow you to do that kind of window management.
Yeah, but, Steve Troughton Smith, I think that's his name. He made a phenomenal one of those for macOS stuff, but it's not free, so I never got it.
Mm-hmm. Of course, we don't want to pay for any kind of software we use.
One day I'll pay for Sublime Text.
I want to ask you two more questions. One is, what is that you're learning now? What are the new things that you're learning now? And where are you learning it? Are you watching YouTube videos? Are you reading articles? How are you learning that stuff?
So whenever I'm learning anything regarding tech, I don't tend to do it. So my very last resort will be video, mainly because I'm impatient and I feel the density of information that's flying past you. If it's going at the speed of sound, it's not literally, hang on. I've talked myself into a corner here, but if it's only going as fast as someone can speak it at you, you're really limited. Whereas you can just fit so much information into your eyesight in one go. You can see when people are covering something you already know, and the eyes can just catch the bit that's really of interest to you. So I'm definitely a reader. I tend, if it's anything related to iOS, I'll get it from Ray Wenderlich, or what's the other website? Paul Hudson's Hacking with Swift is phenomenal for that as well, and Stack Overflow, of course. I think there's another part I didn't address. What are we talking about?
Android?
Android.
What about Android?
I don't really touch Android. I have managed to build apps that are mainly focusing on completely being cross-platform. I build it on Android. I go, oh, thank heavens, it builds. And I hope I don't have to touch any of that native code. One of the first languages I did learn was Java. So I wouldn't be completely out of my luck if I had to get into the native code. But fortunately, I haven't had to dig into that yet.
Knowing a language like Java and being able to develop for Android is two different things, because you have so many different SDKs you have to learn for Android. It's getting a little crazy. I'm in the same boat. I started out with Java in school, and I'm still a hacky Android developer, if you can even consider myself that.
I like to think that TypeScript keeps you in the same mindset at the very least. I always think like, yeah, I could take on a bit of Java, I assume, because it looks somewhat like TypeScript, if I have to.
Java's got a nice syntax. I really like the Java syntax. Comes from ancestors with C, I guess. Comes from C++, maybe?
Oh, don't put me on the spot.
Plus, then Java, then C#. So that was my path, I guess you could call it. Java, C#, and then TypeScript. And all those they all kind of look similar. So that's why I feel very comfortable in all those. As far as knowing SDKs, that's a little bit out there.
SDKs, it's just endless. Like I really like how both NativeScript and React Native and Node GUI and all these other solutions for cross-platform development, they're just completely eschewing the whole kind of UI kit approach of UI views, UI view controllers. It's just like, let's bring it back to something that feels like divs and paragraphs, which we simple web folk can understand.
If everything could be just like HTML development, it'd be so easy.
I wonder.
Are you coming up with new ideas right now as we speak?
This actually came up at the end of our call, the kind of multi-person call a few days ago.
The NativeScript show.
Yeah. There was I think a two-way talk, but maybe between you and Nathan Walker, mentioning how or maybe it was just Nathan Walker on his own, but he was mentioning how in the early days of NativeScript, they were talking about how interesting it would be to kind of bring NativeScript to a browser. It was just a quick aside, but it really caught my attention, and I thought, well, what could we do with a NativeScript runtime if the UI was based on the DOM? You've got kind of like most of your app is a web view, but you have perfect access to a platform, and you don't have the weight of Chromium. You've just got the tiny weight of the NativeScript runtime. That'd be pretty nice. Better than Electron-based apps.
Are you saying to write native apps using divs and HTML syntax, basically?
Lovely, wouldn't it?
That would be really easy. It would certainly decrease that learning curve for learning UIs in NativeScript, that's for sure. And for shared projects like NativeScript with Angular or NativeScript with Vue, you can just write a shared project with one UI layer and you'll be done.
Pick whatever UI framework you like. Everyone's already made a web tech. We've had years to work out the web tech. The moment you need a bit of native functionality is there. You've got your NativeScript runtime.
That sounds really awesome, and I guess that's your next project, right?
If I had all the free time to go wild, I can tell you I've got a whole bunch of things I would definitely want to pursue.
Yeah, there's a lot of
this being the most recent of them.
Yeah, it sounds really tempting to work on, huh? Do you spend any time outside of coding, outside of your workstation, and outside of work, doing anything like movies or games or anything else? My
main hobby is language learning, like actual human language learning. Lately, I have been learning Chinese, and I'm really having fun with that. Yeah, whenever there's any sort of event going on where I might get the chance to use it, yeah.
That's
Love
pretty
to use
awesome. That's great. It seems like a very difficult challenge, but I'm sure that always seems that way when you're not doing it. So this Lingua Browse app that you are building, what is that for, and how do people find it?
So it was actually originally just going to be a toy app for me to help me learn Chinese. And what it does is it augments web pages. So if you see a Chinese language website, for example, and it's just plastered in Chinese characters, you don't even know the pronunciation of them, it will inject transcriptions over them, so you can at least have a fighting chance of pronouncing it. And you can tap on the words, and it will bring up a dictionary for each one.
Is that a Chrome plugin, a Chrome extension?
I would love for it to be an extension, but it requires too many native features. So I had to take a web view and inject lots of JavaScript, which creates two-way communication between the native context, which does lots of natural language processing, feeds back results to the browser, and does some injection to make each word and web page become a click handling node, which will then call back out to the native layer. So it's like lots of round tripping, and of course something like NativeScript fits really well for that because you've got no bridge. That
sounds really cool. That's a really interesting project. Well, I'm going to wrap this up, Jamie. Thanks a lot. How do people get in touch with you if they want to? What's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want to talk to you?
Yeah, Twitter would probably make the most sense. My handle is LinguaBrowse. I'm sure we can put the spelling in there somewhere. Yep, I'm always around. And if you want to talk about NativeScript or I don't know, anything, just give me one of those tweets.
All right, you got it. Appreciate you coming on the show, and good to see you again.
You're great fun.
All right, later.
Bye. Maybe cut that out.